think I'm all set. If you do me a favor, introduce yourself to us. Tell us who you are.
My name is Lawrence Maurer. I am a reporter in Tallahassee for the Tampa Bay Times and the Miami Herald. I've been a journalist since 2006, and I'm, I'm recently married to the love of my life, and well, we're about to go on our honeymoon, so things are pretty good right now.
finally, because of the pandemic, you're finally going to get to have your honeymoon.
Finally,
Congratulations on that, by the
thank
way.
you.
Um, you know what? I remember we met in Las Vegas. I was at KNPR, and you were at the Review Journal, right?
That's right.
Okay. By the way, is that one still there?
Yes, it's the Las Vegas Sun that is still around, kind of.
Kind of.
They were the evening paper when I started out in journalism. Las
Mm,
Vegas was one of the few cities in 2006 that had an evening paper and a morning paper, and they combined on Sundays.
mm.
But yeah, the Review Journal was the morning paper.
Oh, I do. God, I remember those days. Fun days. How'd you get into journalism? Because I read that you studied economics in school.
No, no, actually, it's a slightly embarrassing story, but no, I was actually an accounting major first,
Okay.
and I never thought about being a journalist, never considered it until, I was in my third year of accounting and pretty miserable, not clearly not enjoying it like my classmates were. And I happened to write a letter to the editor of the Review Journal about a professor. At the time, the Review Journal, if you people who don't know, they're a pretty libertarian editorial stance. Actually, not pretty, an extremely libertarian editorial stance. And at the time, they were going on about double dippers and basically people in the legislature who also work in state government. And at the time, that applied to Dina Titus. If you remember, I think she was the Senate majority leader at the time, but she was also a professor at UNLV teaching, like, I think it was state government.
Mm.
And I actually had her for one of these classes in a giant lecture hall where I sat in the back few rows, and she taught about, one of these required classes that every, you know, uh, student has to take about state government. And I knew who she was. I knew that she was in the legislature. And looking back on it, it seems like it kind of makes sense. But I'd always read the newspaper. I was actually a college student still subscribing to the Review Journal, and they were railing about Dina Titus. And I think somebody had written a letter to the editor saying that she was probably indoctrinating all of her students because she was a Democrat, indoctrinating them to be liberals. And I've always been staunchly nonpartisan. Um, I've never been registered to a political party, but I've always been a fairly high news consumer. And I wrote a letter to I'd taken her class just recently. I think it was still in the class or it just ended it, or her class. And I wrote a letter to the editor saying, I actually was on the lookout to see if she was going to be like some raging liberal. And she didn't tell anyone who she was until the very last day of class. And she was like, I don't know if you guys know, but, you know, I'm a I'm in the state legislature and whatnot, and it was an entertaining class. It was a lot. I had a lot of fun, and frankly, it was it, you. I would have no. Most people have no idea if she was a liberal or not by taking the class. And I wrote a letter to the editor of the Review Journal, and they actually printed it, and it was like the lead letter to the editor, and because it's probably rare, I'm sure exceptionally rare for them to get letters to the editor from college students. But I, I'm embarrassed to admit, but I actually liked seeing my name in print. It's true, and I had professors in other classes notice and actually, remark to me. I remember my geology. I think it was my geology um, professor, another required course, but he came up to me. He's like, "Hey, that was a great letter to the editor." I don't think it was actually very good, to be frank, but I decided to take a journalism class after that, and ended up really liking it. I liked the flexibility of the job. I liked how it's a pretty independent job. You can, you don't really have a boss telling you what to do every second of the day. I took a couple classes or excuse me, I started working with the student paper, took a couple classes, and really liked it and switched my major.
Wow.
And yeah, it was, by my senior year, I guess it would have been my fifth year, because I was a little bit delayed because I switched majors. I was interning for the Review Journal on the cops beat. Basically missing my professors. My final semesters were like, just go go work for the paper. You don't really need to be here. And so yeah, I was working at the paper, covering the police beat, and getting real clips in the paper, the local paper, and ended up getting a job. Right before the not the pandemic, the Great Recession hit, and I graduated in 2006, right before that hit, and was really lucky to get a full-time job. And that's kind of how I got started in it.
That is so interesting. I did not know that. But yeah, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's all right to like your name, in the paper. It's seeing it up there. It's a good thing. It's all right.
Well, yeah, I mean, it definitely has totally lost its cachet, of course. But initially it was kind of like, wow, this is kind of interesting and important. I felt like,
Yeah.
and my looking back on it, I mean, it kind of made sense. But I was not one of these kids who knew from an early age that we're going to be a journalist. I'd never actually thought about it, even though I grew up reading the paper because my parents read the paper. So.
You know what? Neither did I. I don't know a lot of people that did. I remember. So I met you. You were at the Las Vegas Review Journal, and you had been working on this big story about police brutality or use of force with the Las Vegas police, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this turned into a big series, and it changed things. I mean, this wasn't just that, that you were up for a lot of awards. It's just it actually changed the way the police department operates. But tell me how you found that story. Just briefly, like what the story entails. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I was covering. I think it was on Night Cops at the time. I was working a swing shift, 2 to 11 p.m., covering the police beat, going to crime scenes, writing about crime but Las Vegas at the time, like a lot of police departments, but Las Vegas in particular, had a lot of police involved shootings. And by that, I mean police shooting people, and sometimes killing people. And it was weird because it seemed to follow like this cycle. There'd be a lot of shootings in a row, and then there'd be a drop off of shootings, and then there'd be another round of shootings and a lot of controversy, because a lot of these shootings were on people who were unarmed. A lot of them were black, and there was one shooting in particular, Trevon Cole. I don't know if you remember this case, but it was a case of a young man who was selling small amounts of weed from his apartment, and police ended up doing a raid on his apartment. Banging. It was they broke open the door, came in. He was flushing weed down the toilet, and an officer shot and killed him. And this was really this was on the heels. I believe it was right after another really controversial shooting, involving I think it was an Air Force veteran, maybe, who, I can't believe I can't remember the name, but it was in a Costco parking lot in the suburbs of Las Vegas. But anyway, Trevon Cole, there were questions raised about this right away. This was an officer who had been in multiple shootings before, and the officer's story was refuted by the medical examiner. The officer said this guy turned and pointed with two hands at the officer as if he was holding a gun shooting him. And of course, he had no gun. The medical examiner said he was not facing the officer, and the evidence showed that he was flushing weed down the toilet. And so my sources in the police department were the ones who told me that there was something seriously wrong here. And my attitude towards it was, well, there have been so many shootings. I want to actually know what's really going on. The paper had done these kind of anecdotal stories. Oh, there have been X number of shootings in the last few years, but they didn't really tell you what's going on. And my idea was to take a look at every shooting for the last 20 years across all of the Southern Nevada police departments, including Las Vegas, the big one, of course, being Las Vegas Metro, and actually look at the data, do a deep dive examination on every single incident, including whether the incidents in which somebody was not hit by a bullet, instances where police missed. And you would take all this data, you would analyze time of day, where this happened, who the officer was, characteristics of the officer, how long the officer had been on the force, where this officer was assigned, what unit, looking at the person who was shot at, who were they, what was their age, what were they doing, were they armed, what were they armed with, and basically doing an exam. It ended up being an examination. The paper signed off on this, doing an examination of, it was more than 400 shootings going back 20 years. And it revealed, now this was before Ferguson. This was published in 2011. This was years before Ferguson. At the time, it was the only kind of examination of its kind, and certainly of its scope, of police shootings in this many police shootings by a police department.
And the series, by the way, it was called Deadly Force, right?
Yeah, it was called Deadly Force, and it ended up publishing over 5 days, and it was more than 20 ad-free print pages, special series, and within a week, I believe it was a week, it was very soon, the Justice Department contacted. They had seen it, and the Department of Justice had their COPS office, which is a division of the Department of Justice that works with police departments to basically improve them, they notice problems, and they go in and try to help. And they had noticed the series and contacted the sheriff at the time, Doug Gillespie, and said, basically, hey, we got a problem here, and specifically, you have a problem here. Let us help you. And the sheriff, they've kind of spun it since then, saying that they were the ones to reach out, but that's not true. It's, in the first COPS report about shootings. But basically, they took the database that we built, and it wasn't just me. It was me, Brian Haynes, Alan Mayman, and we had an editor at the time too. But we combed through all the police department homicide records. So after each shooting, they have the homicide detectives investigate and publish a report, usually somewhere around 20 pages, with a narrative and statistics and things like that about the incident, about what happened. And we went through each one of those. The paper actually spent $10,000 to buy those public records from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, which the paper had never done before. And we went through every single one. We read through every single coroner's inquest that had happened over the last 20 years. I mean, we had the coroner's office dig up these old dusty, binders with transcripts of each coroner's inquest after each fatal shooting, and read through those and basically entered into a database all these different data points. And I had the former Metro undersheriff, the former sheriff, all kinds of detectives and police officers on the record talking about these incidents and basically saying, yes, there's something very wrong with this police department. And of course, what they were doing is they were shooting people and not analyzing why they were shooting at people. They were just covering it up, basically. And the state attorney was doing that too. They were relying on this bogus coroner's inquest process to basically clear all these shootings.
I remember we had you on the show, State of Nevada, talking about this series and everything that you had found. And I mean, to me, this is, basic journalism 101, but it's also so intensive. Again, having looked through all this data over many years to try to basically paint a picture, which is what a big part of what we do.
Well,
I
yeah,
wanted to know.
I mean, and the idea is to use data to do it. I mean,
Yeah,
I wanted something that was irrefutable, and the Justice Department took our database. They used our database for their report. You know, we'd spent a year doing nothing else. This basically,
I'm sure they were
and
grateful.
yeah, I mean, I remember sitting down with them, and they were like, "Well, look, can we borrow this your data?" And they verified it, or I handed it to them on a disk, and they ended up using it for their stuff, and they verified it. And we had I think there might have been two different data points that they disagreed with, but out of thousands of data points, I think they basically verified everything we did.
What was it like after that report came out? Because you're covering the police beat, and this comes out. I don't know. What was it? Was it any different the way police dealt with you, the different departments?
Yes and no. I mean, frankly, after it published, I was shocked by how little things changed. Uh, at the time, it published, I think, in November of 2011, and nothing much happened. It was like kind of like crickets. It was very weird, and I was very down about it, because like you spend all this time and nothing really happens. The dam really broke. I didn't know what the Justice Department was doing behind the scenes at this time, but they were in contact with the sheriff's office. But the dam kind of broke when early in 2012, Metro shot and killed a unarmed, disabled black man who was mentally ill and happened to be a war veteran. He was an Iraq war veteran, a Gulf War veteran, and that it was on video. It was captured on video, and it was just an absolute outrage. I mean, even people in the police department were telling me that this was really a true outrage, something really wrong here, and that's when everyone kind of went to my, the Justice Department soon after that, I think, had announced they were looking at Metro, we're working with Metro to on the issue of police shootings, and it ended up being within the police department. I got a lot of pushback. I mean, some people were like, "This, you're absolutely right." Some people in the police department, some of my sources were like, "Wow, you're right, but this is really tough to see, and I'm really not happy to see it." My sources got a lot of blowback. The people I quoted in the story, there were some of the people who were brave enough to be quoted on the record in my story got a lot of pushback from their own police. And I was more upset about that than any pushback I got, because, you want to protect the people who are willing to speak with you, on the record, pretty much more than anything. That's your real priority, is to protect those people. And, they got a lot of blowback and they suffered consequences as far as jobs. I know that happened. And, the long-term fallout ended up being the cops office, the DOJ's cops office, ended up using our reporting and what they did in Las Vegas as a template for reforming other police departments around the country. More than a dozen police departments. When Ferguson blew up, they used the cops office, the model they used in Las Vegas, basically using data to examine trends. That's what they ended up doing in Ferguson and all these other police departments that have had trouble since. And that lasted until Trump came into office and basically dismantled the cops office.
Coming back to what you just said about your sources, what do you tell them ahead of time when you're working on a story? There's a risk for them.
Oh yeah.
So what do you tell them? How do you approach that?
I tell them, I try to be as straight up as possible. I say, are you comfortable saying this on the record? Because here's what's going to happen. And, you're going to get blowback. You have a high chance of losing your job. And some people are aware of that and some people aren't. anytime you're dealing, I mean, you know this, but anytime you're dealing with sources, they're kind of fall into two categories: those who are experienced dealing with the media and being a public figure, and those who aren't. And the people who aren't are the ones you got to be really careful of. And I mean, I've quashed stories because, or figured out another way to tell stories, but or simply not done stories because it's going to be way too much. The source is going to be way too exposed. And is that worth it? I mean, you're at the end of the day, you're the one who is supposed to be looking out for them. We're in a tremendous position of power in our business, and that's something we need to keep in mind all the time.
Right.
And if a source is going to be, lose their job, their livelihood, I mean, this does happen. We all know this as journalists. I mean, you have to ask a serious question, which is this story worth it?
Right.
And let's be honest, the impact of a news story is probably less than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so you got to weigh that factor in here, when you're doing a story and talking to sources and stuff. And, I just try to have a very frank conversation with them, near the beginning. With experienced sources, it's less of an issue, of course, but with those who are inexperienced, I mean, it's not. I think every reporter has been on the end of a source who really does get burned after a story runs through no fault of your own, but sometimes also through some fault of your own.
Right.
And I'm sorry, that's not worth it. It's a sickening feeling, as many reporters know.
But thank you for sharing that. That's an important aspect too, of what we do. So you went from Nevada, Las Vegas, very colorful place, to Florida, another very colorful place. I remember when you left. Well, I mean, for you, what do you think of that move, and why was it attractive?
Yeah, it was a move to the Palm Beach Post's investigative team. And the Palm Beach Post had reached out to me, and I knew some people there, and they said, "Hey, we liked what you did in Las Vegas. We want you to do that here." And it was a tough move initially because Las Vegas is where I grew up, and I love Las Vegas, but I was definitely ready for something new. And the one thing, one big difference moving to Florida, of course, is the public records are so much better here than they are in a lot of other states. And it's certainly in Nevada, they're not nearly as good as they are in Florida. And, I moved to West Palm Beach, lived at the time I could afford to live downtown, which was great. I love West Palm. But, I really enjoyed the change and the people in Palm Beach. And, I thought I had some, pretty fun stories. I mean, Florida is a gold mine for reporters, not just because of it's not really the public records that make it great. It's because there's just so much crazy stuff, going on.
Yes, there is.
And,
yes, there is.
Geez, I mean, just from corruption to just crazy people to, it never ends,
Yeah, no, listen, if you want to cut your chops as a journalist, you do Florida, you do that for a few years, you could do it anywhere.
Oh,
So,
totally.
absolutely.
It's a constant stream of insanity, really. Insanity and corruption and just straight up ne'er-do-wells and, good people who find themselves in crazy situations and just all kinds of nut stuff.
And you're going to, what, especially if you're covering crime, because criminals like the sunshine and the beach too. So,
Well, both cities have a weird tendency to attract people who want to, have a fresh start, right? And in Florida, a lot of these people come from the Northeast. In Nevada, they come from all over, and which seems nuts to me because I don't know if there's a city in America that has more facial recognition systems or cameras than Las Vegas because of all the casinos. But they always, everybody ended up in Las Vegas, and everybody seems to end up in Florida.
I always tell people, you know what? I left Sin City for the Magic City. That sounds like a Michael Bay movie, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah.
Um, you're covering politics for the Tampa Bay Times up in Tallahassee,
Mhm.
and so talk about Florida politics. What's been the most enjoyable part of that job and the biggest challenge?
Oh, let's see. Well, I should back up. I was kind of hesitant to take the job up here because I'm not a huge fan of politics. I don't really, I never, politics in general doesn't interest me. I'm much more of a policy person and like getting, trying to weed the politics out of stuff and to find the truth. And, but that has been a pleasant surprise. The part of the job I really do like are the people. Um, I really do enjoy talking to and meeting the politicians, the staffers, the lobbyists. I mean, a lot of these people like do, and this is something that I don't think gets captured well, but there's at least there, I think there's a perception out there that a lot of these people are good or bad, and really it's just a gray area. You got a collection of people up here who have their own motivations, and some of those motivations are bad, some of those motivations are good, and some of those motivations are somewhere in between. Most of them probably are, but there's it's a when you sit down and talk to these people, and you kind of you really learn that it's not things are not what they seem at first appearance. You may hear a lawmaker have some kind of big blustery speech or something, and then you go sit down in their office and talk to them for a while, and it's um, you find out they're just regular people. All these people are just regular people, and I really enjoy talking to them. The hard and I should say another part is that I really love um, the, the learning about the different issues up here. I mean, the best thing about journalism, in my opinion, is just you're always learning about new stuff, new topics. You become kind of expert. You try to become an expert on all kinds of different topics, from tax policy to law enforcement to um, environmental policy to voting to. I mean, it just never ends. And I mean, this year I wrote a story about auto titles and the process of getting your car titled because there was a bill up here that would kind of screw with that a little bit. And it's just endlessly interesting to me. um, the hard part or the difficult part is things are toxic right now. Politics is pretty toxic, and it's that part is not fun. I get angry emails from people on both sides of the issue all the time, left and the right, saying I'm either in the camp for DeSantis or I hate DeSantis, Governor Ron DeSantis, that is, or, I hate Republicans or I hate Democrats. That's not fun. Also um, there's obviously been an effort to kind of demonize the news media, traditional news media. And while I think some of the criticism is legitimate, it's a lot of it is just flat toxic, and it's used by politicians, frankly, on both sides to you know demonize. This is not a new issue.
Right.
Politicians, as long as there have been politicians and as long as there have been newspapers, they've always been blaming reporters and newspapers for their problems or accusing us of being biased. But it just is very toxic nowadays, and that's not fun. I
Is
don't
it?
enjoy that.
I wonder, your day to day up in the because the Florida legislature, as of this conversation, had just finished its session not too long ago. The day to day, what's it like there? And I wonder, like, are Republicans and Democrats open to talking to you? Um, has it gotten more challenging? Yes, we're in Florida. We have the sunshine laws, which supposed to create a lot of transparency. But every now and then people are going to try to find a way to hide. I don't know what your experience, like for this example, this last session, the kind of things that you'd see day to day when you go into the Capitol.
Day to day, well, yeah, the session is quite different. The legislative session is only 60 days. Maybe it'll extend a few days, and there's committee weeks leading up to it. But you know, that's only if part of the year. Most of the year is spent, literally in my home. We don't have an office up here anymore. Um, but day to day, and certainly during session, it's um, running into people in the hallways, trying to meet with lawmakers in their offices, and I'm always pleasantly surprised by lawmakers on both sides will talk to us. Well, and will talk to me. I mean, there's some, of course, lawmakers who don't like us, but I think by and large, I mean, I have no issue, having conversations with people. I mean, sometimes there are senators who would actively try to duck us, but you really can't during session because you can see them in the hallway. You'll catch them in the hallway. It's a one time a year session is the one time a year where you can basically find anyone in the legislature anytime. And you know, it's a very social atmosphere. You know, there's lobbyists like to talk, gossip. I mean, there's a lot of gossipers, and I'm not the strongest when it comes to gossip. I mean, some people. I mean, like my wife, she's a reporter too. She is just really, she loves the goss, and she's awesome at it. I'm not so much, but I mean, people just like to talk, and they like to talk about ideas. They like to meet people. When the session was closed for the pandemic, it was only basically reporters in the legislature. The public largely wasn't allowed in, lobbyists weren't allowed in, and lawmakers were pretty miserable. I mean, they like having people from their communities come up. I mean, every day there's like a random group of people. It could be AARP Day or uh, Leon, or not Leon County Day, but any county has their day up here, and where people come up and meet with their local delegation, and lawmakers love that. They like the social aspect. It's one of the fun parts of the job for them, and also for us. And it's a while it's extremely contentious on the floor, a lot of these debates, and this year especially was emotionally draining for not just Democrats but also Republicans, and also for reporters, lobbyists. I mean, a lot of people just found this session draining emotionally because of all the hot topics, and that part can be exhausting. But day to day, I mean, like, people will generally talk. That's the one difference on this job compared to covering police. Covering the police beat, getting police to talk to you is tough. I mean, they can get in real trouble for talking to a reporter. A lot of them, if not all of them. And for up here, I mean, lobbyists like to talk. Lawmakers like to talk. Staffers. I mean, it's just kind of like it really it's a lot easier in that sense.
I got to tell
So.
you, you know what? Maybe that's. I was just thinking about one of the challenges of doing a talk show is it's been getting lawmakers on the program. And,
Hmm.
and look, it's not to say that, I know people will say, oh, you're public radio, so you're liberal. And so when you look at it, yes, we get more Democrats than Republicans. It's not because we're not inviting them. It's just
Hmm.
that they're not coming on. So, that is a challenge. Maybe we just need to go and plant ourselves in the Capitol and do the show from the hallway.
Well, that might, I mean, frankly, yeah, you can get people in the hallway much easier. I would say, yeah, it has gotten a little bit tougher over the last few years. I mean, I remember my colleagues up here have noticed this trend just in the last year of, like, lawmakers not getting back to us, and not just Republicans, but some Democrats too. And that definitely is a challenge because, you don't want your readers only hearing from Democrats. I mean, Democrats in general are more likely to talk to us because they're not the ones in power,
Right.
frankly.
Right.
So
Exactly.
they have more to gain from talking to us than Republicans do.
And to
But
point, because, and you mentioned that just to point out to anybody who's not from Florida that the House, the Senate, and the governor's office are Republican.
yes.
Um, let me finish with this. Just thinking about, all of your experiences. If you're talking to a group of people who, they don't know the field, they don't know, I mean, they consume news, but they don't know what we do, or they're just now learning what we do. What's that one thing you would want to say to them about what it means to be a journalist? Maybe what they get wrong about us.
Oh boy. Um, there's a lot there. One thing that I think they should keep in mind is that, and I think this goes for not just journalists but everyone right now, is that we are just people. We are just regular people who are generally, I mean, we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to do the right job here. We don't want to get things wrong. That is still a big black mark on a journalist's reputation, is getting stories wrong. I mean, we beat ourselves up over it far more than the public does. We are badly outnumbered nowadays. I mean, there's far fewer of us than ever before, yet more demands on us than ever before. Um, I would say, if you can afford to, subscribe to a local paper, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a paper, but it could be any media outlet that you like, that you feel uh, presents issues fairly. Um, and we're kind of in a position here where, I don't know how much longer there are going to be independent journalists like us. So that the financing model is kind of going away, frankly. Most papers are shrinking. At least local papers are shrinking. There are some local outfits or nonprofit outfits that are trying to fill the void, but as far as independent journalists, there's not many of us left anymore compared to what there used to be. And so it's like, if you want to help out, contact a reporter. Subscribe to a news outlet. Um, don't be afraid to ever reach out and say, hey, here's something I think is being missed. um, I kind of start there.
No, that's a good point. No, and you know what I mean. I know that's a big question, and yeah, I always just want to hear whatever any journalist is thinking about that, and it could be just one thing that you're thinking about most, but I think that's the purpose, of the podcast. It's just, I think it is an important point to remind people we're still just humans, and you can't judge every journalist the same, because depending on what medium they're in or what company they work for, and even then, what kind of journalist they are. I've met some great ones, like you. I think of you as one of the great journalists. I met
Thank you.
I met some terrible ones.
Of course,
That
of course.
it's a shame that we have them, but what do we
It's like
do?
any other field. It's like,
Right.
you look at any profession, wherever you are in your workplace. You gotta Most people are trying to do the right thing most of the
Right.
time. Yeah, there's a subset that is truly exceptional and great at everything they're doing all the time. There's a subset that is really not good and should not be doing anything. They should not be in this business. And that's true of literally every field. I mean, actually,
Right.
police officers are the ones who I find to be the most honest about that. Frankly, there's
Right.
certain guys they know should not be in that field. Most people are just trying to get by, and then there's some at the very top that are really just truly
Yeah.
exceptional people that are doing the right thing all the time. But
No,
yeah,
no, you know what? That's a good, and sadly, like with police, us, or anybody, those few bad ones are the ones that get all the attention.
oh
So,
yeah,
and it
oh
makes the
yeah.
rest of us look bad. So,
But that's
oh,
just, I mean, that's life, right? I mean,
yeah.
it's just that's we our business certainly has its share of black marks.
Hmm.
But I mean, I don't know. I mean, who's harder on us than us? How many publications are out there navel gazing at the journalism industry?
Absolutely.
It's so yeah.
Lawrence, thank you so much for sharing with me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being in the reporter studio.
Hey, very happy to be here, Lewis, and I wish you all the best of luck with this.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let me end